Hi to everyone. Warm welcome to the wide audience who follow us on social media platform right now or who have registered beforehand and directly participate on today's panel discussion. Today is 4th of September and we are starting 7th EENCE Club entitled Citizenship Education for SDG number 4, Access to Education during COVID-19. Today, we will share genuine experience from EU countries and Eastern Partnership region. EENCE Club project aims at promotion of democratic development and citizenship education through creation of a space for public debates and experience sharing. All EENCE Club topics and themes are focused on sustainable development goals of UN. Together with the great panelists coming from Germany, Italy, Bulgaria, Georgia, and Armenia, we will dive into the education system and access to education during COVID-19. COVID-19 has hit all the aspects of our life, so creating the challenges and obstacles at the same time. Education is probably the most vulnerable field in this regard and has been affected most. In our discussion, we will particularly focus on the issues related to access to education, quality of education, equity of education during pandemic time. EENCE Club project is organized by EENCE in the framework of Citizenship Education Week with an interesting title, Art of Living Online. This project is supported by Federal Agency for Civic Education using the funds that are coming from Federal Foreign Office of Germany. Some technical announcement, dear audience and dear panelists. The panel discussion will be in English. It will last 1 hour, but no worries, you will have still time, 30 minutes for a question and answer session. So if you have any question right now or during the process, feel free to drop your question at the chat box in the social media or at the comment box directly at Zoom. If your question is related to a specific panelist, please mention it in your question and also be free to introduce yourself, like your name, surname, organization you present or country you are coming from. Shortly about the organizer of this event, it's Eastern European Network for Citizenship Education, EENCE, which history goes back to 2015. The mission of the network is to have a tangible contribution in the sustainable development of civil society in Eastern Partnership region and Russia through widening the citizenship education sphere and developing the capacity of the institutions and experts in the field. If you are interested to become a partner organization of the network or an individual expert of the network, so please check the details and sign the memorandum at eence.eu. This year, EENCE will be full of various interesting events. The events are created both by the EENCE working groups and itself the Citizenship Education Week, Art of Living Together is full of various contests such as contest of online best practices or contest of publications, etc. All details, please check again at eence.eu. My name is Narine Teknejyan. I'm the co-founder and trainer at Youth is Power NGO based in the Republic of Armenia. I am the member of EENCE Coordination Council, leader of EENCE Working Group Women in Local Communities, and I'm the project manager of EENCE Club. Today's panel discussion will be moderated by Narine Teknejyan. Let me share her beautiful poster. Ani is an expert and trainer in the field of education. with the experience of 10 years and more. Okay, now I can share Annie's beautiful poster with you. I hope you see it. Narine Teknejyan is an expert trainer on the field of gender education and communication studies. She is at the same time lecturer at Yerevan State University, expert and trainer at Youth is Power NGO. She has, as I have mentioned, she has more than 10 years experience, and she is collaborating with many international, local, and regional institutions. Thus, a productive, useful, and interesting panel discussion, and I leave the floor to the moderator, Narine Teknejyan.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for technical issues again. I'm experiencing some technical issues. Give me just a second, please. I'm trying to figure out. But before, thank you, Narine, for your very warm and kind introduction to this COP of EENCE and to our speakers. And I need to confess that every single time I do admire the way you actually present the EENCE to our different audiences with the same devotion and enthusiasm. And as Narine mentioned, today we're going to talk about COVID educational issues, but particularly related to COVID-19, trying to figure out what issues we face during COVID. But before and within the framework actually of this EENCE discussion clubs, we will focus on citizenship education for sustainable development goals number 4, which is, just for reminding us, it's ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. But as I've mentioned, particularly today, we will have a chance to focus more on those educational issues that actually are directly or indirectly related to COVID-19. Before jumping, because as Narine mentioned, many of our professional and public spheres of our lives have been affected due to COVID-19. But education probably has been affected most. And as UN reports, more than already 1 billion children are at risk to fall behind because of COVID-19 and because of closures of schools and universities also, let it be partial or full closures. But before jumping into our discussion, I would kindly ask you to join me to welcome our speakers who come from different communities. Some of them are professionals and education experts, and some of them are civil society representatives. So we have 4 presenters or speakers today who come from Armenia, Georgia, Bulgaria, and Germany. Dear colleagues, thank you for your readiness and support to join us and to share your thoughts and your concerns and insights over the issue of today's issue of topic. Please welcome our first speaker, who is Armenuhi Avakian from Armenia, who is a PhD and associate professor. She's a speech therapist and inclusive education expert, the founder of ARMAV Continuous Education Center in Armenia. Armenia has conducted her postdoctoral research as a Fulbright scholar in the US, and also she was a senior expert and trainer of the project developing inclusive education, and education for teacher training and mentoring capacities in Armenia. She's also the author of scientific articles and essays, and also editor of books on inclusive education, and co-author of Inclusive Education Strategies textbook, which are, I believe, available online. And if participants and our audience members will be happy to learn more, and if they are in English, I will ask later Armine to just share the links to this textbook, very valuable textbooks as well. And here I would like to invite Armine, because I know that my speakers came today with special objects, that physical objects, items that they are going to present. These are objects that they specifically connect either with their profession or with their daily routine or current situation, or even with today's topic. Please, Armine, could you tell us and show us what is the object that you decided to bring today?
Hello, everybody. I greet you all. I'm very happy to participate in this event. Anijan, thank you so much for introduction. And I brought a hand sanitizer with me, and I will explain why and what is the connection with this subject and my profession. And by the way, with COVID-19, even during COVID-19, when I, as a speech therapist, did online sessions, I sometimes mechanically would sanitize my hands between two sessions. That's why I associate COVID-19 and my profession with this subject. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you too. That has become some kind of like inseparable part of our daily routine and even professional activity. You're totally right. Thank you, Armine. Our second speaker is Natalie from Georgia. Natalie Gamsemlidze. Please correct me if I mispronounce your surname. I'm sorry for that. And Nata has her master's degree in applied political psychology, and she's civic education project manager, and she has experience in youth work such as adult education, gender equality, and organizational development. Her passion and project specialties include neuroeducation, diversity studies, youth education, and furthering the broader causes of intercultural competences, and most importantly, women empowerment. Please welcome Nato. And Nato, dear, could you share that very specific object that you have decided today to bring and share with us?
First of all, Ani, thank you for these kind words and introduction. And it is my pleasure to be with you today. And it is an amazing chance to interact with an international audience as well. So today I brought this blue box. It is tiny miniature statue of a police box that is blue. And it comes from the pop culture TV series Doctor Who. It is a time machine. And as it is kind of a metaphor to educators that we need to foresee the students' need. So what future is expecting from us and from our students, and it is essential to prepare students for the future and future challenges. So that is the reminder.
Perfect. That was surprising for me to get this, but it's very original and it's at the same time very actual. Thank you, Nato. And our third speaker, please welcome Mihailo Milovanovic, originally from Bulgaria, currently based in Italy, but with lots of and rigorous experience, research experience in Armenia, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, and other countries as well. Mihailo is a senior policy specialist at the Center for Applied Policy and Integrity in Bulgaria. His research interests and publications focus on education policy analysis, corruption prevention, very important, and integrity in education, and the application of distributed ledger technologies, which is blockchain in education. Previously, Mihailo was also a research fellow with the Institutional Corruption Initiative of Edmund Safra Center for Ethics at the Harvard School of Law, policy analyst with the OECD Directorate and for Education and Skills, and coordinator for the Education Cooperation with Eastern Europe for the Federal Government of Austria and the Stability Pact for the Southeast Europe. So, Michael, it's your turn to show us what is the object with you today.
Thanks. When I heard kind of the CV that I sent to, realized so many things. I must be kind of quite old, and in fact, the object I have is kind of quite old. So I mean, we can see that's a that's a game, electronic game, which is called Dracula. So in the 80s, some of you may remember, probably most of you don't, because you were not born at that time. This was like a boom of these games, which were like handheld LCD games. So this was like a tough game, and we really loved to play it, because Dracula essentially is trying to enter a castle. And it's kind of pretty much similar to what we also experienced in our schools quite often. We tried to sort of join the bandwagon of teachers who were kind of hurrying through the material without really stopping much to kind of help you out. So either you join or you don't. And if you don't join, all kinds of things fall on you. And ultimately you have 3 games and then you're over. And so we loved this game. It was really difficult. In addition to that, it broke. So it became even more difficult to play. And as life goes, I also lost it. And so during the pandemic, somehow I said, well, let's maybe do something different. And so I found this game again. I bought it, and just like before, it was tough and it was broken. So maybe all of these games that are circulating on the market are broken in some way, which really reminded me of pretty much what we found during the pandemic, that yes, pandemic brings a lot of new challenges, but essentially very often it's really about dealing with the same old problems that have been there before. And now we just see them on the magnifying glass, because when I play this game now, it was more difficult also because I'm not 15 years old anymore. And so that's my object. It really connects me to my schooling experience. And unfortunately, it reflects the schooling experience of many people today still. And so so it's called Dracula. If anybody's interested, I can shoot you a message about where to find it. Maybe your copy will be not broken. Mine is as it should be. Yeah.
We did check, actually. Well, that was very insightful, very metaphorical, I need to say, and very fictive, but at the same time factive. So it's very fictional, but still there are some facts. They are based on facts. Whatever you said, you are totally right. Yeah. Now, and our last speaker, Martin Talhammer from Germany, currently based in Georgia. It's already 3 years, right, Martin, if I'm not mistaken. He's a program advisor, civic education teachers forum, and a trainer and educational program designer with focus on youth work, peace building, and organizational development. Martin is the initiator of peer mentoring program in Germany. And Martin, please, now your turn to show the object with you.
First of all, thank you very much for those warm words, dear Anni, dear Narine. It's a great opportunity to be with you. Hello to everybody. I brought a very analog tool or device with me in this digital times. It's a ball of wool, and I guess most of you probably know this game where you throw it within a seminar from person to person, and you create like a network within the group to present
right.
each other, to introduce each other, whatever. And I took it because first of all, it reflects a bit like my personal background of youth work and non-formal education, and where those methods are used a lot. And second, I took it because I think it's a nice sign of, of inclusion. The good thing about this game is that everybody is included, everybody has to say something, everybody is participating. And I think that's one of the main challenges of the educational system in general, but especially in times of Corona and of pandemic, that nobody is left behind, and that everybody is able to participate and everybody is included within the learning process.
Right, thank you. That was again really insightful. And it, again, indirectly or directly is connected with the access and obstacles to access to education, Thank you for that. And now for our audience to be clear and to have this view how we're going to move further. So guys, once we have the introduction part, we have questions, sets of questions, and I will ask a question and each of our speakers will have a chance to reflect on the question as well as to reflect on each other. And once we're done with the question, we will already have a chance to have this question answer session already with you, with the audience. And how you can ask your question. If you have a question, please just put it in the chat box. We will gather with Narine and our speakers will be able to answer them. Or you can just raise this hand icon and ask your question directly. So this is how we're going to move. Now on our topic. So I was thinking why it's important to focus on education, because first of all, COVID-19 is a health issue. But at the same time, whether we want it or not, we need to acknowledge and see that all the social spheres really have been actually affected. And as I've already mentioned, education has been affected most. And teaching and helping our students to achieve their potential fully, it's very rewarding act. But at the same time, it's not only a rewarding act, but education is a fundamental human right also, which was, even violated very often or affected very often because of COVID-19. So we are here to listen to your opinion, to your insights today, but how I want to arrange the questions. So before jumping immediately into how COVID impacted the education sector, let it be formal, non-formal, higher education, general education, I want us to reflect what issues we had before. So let's reflect on the past, on the present, and probably on the future as well. So the first question is, what were the main issues and topics on the education agenda, either in your country or in your region, before the COVID? So what were these main problems, challenges that your country and civil society and education experts, communities were trying to solve before COVID-19? So the floor is open, and I would like probably Armine to start with the question. Armine, please.
Thank you, Ani. So I'll speak about the past, the educational problems in Armenia before COVID-19. In 2003, Armenian education reforms were directed toward the development of new approaches and the promotion of quality education, particularly through changing the classroom learning environment and concentrating on student-centered approaches and inclusive education. Today, I'll introduce three of many issues related to education equity, from equity, inclusion, and quality perspectives in Armenia. Of course, there are many, but I'll stop on three of them. So the first issue I would mention is there is a need to improve the quality of trainings for teachers. And here I am speaking about pre-service and in-service education. But because I'm not included in pre-service educational system last 2 years, I will mostly speak about in-service education. For many years, the only possibility of professional development was participation in short-term in-service teacher trainings. Fragmented short-term trainings were mostly based on theoretical components. However, application of this theoretical knowledge in inclusive pedagogical practice was missing. And important issues in trainer professional development were the absence of control in the content of training materials, their appropriateness to evidence-based practices, the absence of follow-up and continuous support to teachers after the trainings, and the absence of evaluation component, including feedback from participants. These issues were addressed last 2 years, and some of them got solutions, but about them I'll speak later. The second issue I would mention is the need for improvement of the educational environment. The improvement of material resources and physical environment, as you will agree with me, is the key precondition to providing quality education for all students, especially for ones with special educational needs. Schools, teachers, and students have to be able to access and apply assistive technology to enhance inclusion within mainstream classrooms. So to ensure that the classroom is truly inclusive, the teacher and other professionals have to be involved in supporting children with disabilities using assistive technology, require appropriate knowledge and skills to bring potential to reality. Unfortunately, we are lacking assistive technologies, including alternative communication devices for children with profound communication difficulties. And the last issue I would mention is about inclusive education reforms. So they continue to be focused only on primary and secondary education levels, with limited efforts at the preschool, vocational training, universities, and lifelong learning. It is well known that these levels of education are critical because one provides early intervention and effective development possibilities. The other one provides independent living and professional development possibilities. Concluding, I would say that while there are numerous pieces of legislation in place that promote the institutionalization programs and accelerate the progress of inclusive education practices in Armenia, there are still barriers at the societal and educational levels in ensuring that children feel included and successfully educated alongside with their peers. On the other hand, the experience of developed countries with longer history in providing inclusive education shows that the educational systems always need an improvement and development. And that is all about the first question. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for it. That was really insightful. And I have just made some notes and I have some questions, but probably I will ask you later, particularly connected with this perception of inclusive or the word inclusive education, because you talked about this access of inclusive education to primary school and preschool at preschool levels, and that was the limitation. But my question will be, but not necessarily you will have time to think over this and probably answer this later. So what was the perception in the Armenian society, the notion? Because I know in many countries, it's kind of like controversially accepted. So people have a limited also notion and perception of the concept of inclusive education. What is inclusive education? Thank you, but you will have time later to reflect on this. Thank you. Now the same question, what problems we had before COVID-19, probably Nato, that I will ask you to cover this part, please.
Thank you, Ani, for the question, and Armoni for such a great insights about this topic. I would start with the main issue in Georgian educational system. We see the rapid change of educational ministers and the change of the titles of the ministry itself. And it is very strange that we don't have this strategy. What we are expecting from the citizen after receiving general education to be whom she will become, etc. But let us go in these new developments in the Georgian strategy of education. Starting from 2019, Georgian Science and Education introduced us with the new approach, and it is called New School Model. And it is now piloting in several schools, and its goal is to improve the quality of teaching and learning at schools. Today, we call it the implementation of the third generation curriculum, and it will be introduced in all schools till the year by the year 2024. So now we have this experimental phase till 2025 to see what happens in the educational sphere. But what is important, this new reform, educational reform, promises us that schools and teachers will be able to determine their strengths, to understand their needs, and especially plan the curriculum regarding the students' needs. So it will be more focused on student rather than the policy of school or the state itself. And it is actually the good sign for now. And let's go and talk about the civic education itself. It is important that starting in 2011, it was only taught to 2 grades, 9th and 10th. And now we have this development when we have 2 grades studying civic education already in primary school. Subject is called Me and Society. We have citizenship education in 3 grades in the secondary school. And now we are also waiting for the new reform of high school, where we are promised to have civic education as a basic subject, and that kids, school students will be obliged to do at least 2 civic education projects by the end of that time. It is like the result of what we have now and what we had before is the huge set of campaigning, advocating with the state, with the help of major donors such as USAID. And it is also worth mentioning that we try to now have this development in schools where civic education is not just a theoretical subject about political education, but it is rather learning from doing. That reason, and also like that reason, in one of our long-lasting project, Future Generation, we managed to establish around 1,200 civic clubs in Georgian schools, where students have this space, like kind of a safe space where they can design and implement their school projects, also work actively in communities, plan their community action plans, and all of this is knowledge and value-based education and what is important. But for now, we still are fighting with the roots that Soviets have left as with us, right? And we still have teachers who are not willing to adopt in this new era.
Yeah. I see. Thank you, Naro. Again, that was insightful. And most of the questions and problems, actually, the ones you mentioned, that are either in the same way or similarly shared in our society, in the Armenian as well. So we have the same issues, even though we have this citizenship education related courses in terms of or in the forms of this me and my environment or social studies or social science. Not always they are, for example, let's say, sensitive from different values and rights perspectives. So the courses are there, but still, as you mentioned, there is always room and space to develop and improve them. Thank you. And now some question to you, probably Mihailo. Would you like to cover I know it's a bit difficult for you because you have your own country experience, but at the same time, as a researcher, you have this experiences of working with different countries, including Armenia and Georgia, right? Please feel free to share any of them or all of them, any of them that you like to.
Thanks. This is always this temptation. Yeah, I've seen 3-4 places and now I know everything that happens there. And then you tend to make these statements that you think refer to all countries and are valid for all countries, which is absolutely not true. So I kind of, whatever I put here as notes is just two kind of footnotes. First footnote, This is like very generic. So there's so many details and idiosyncrasies in each context that, you know, I'm very far away from claiming that these few sentences that I can say somehow account for all the differences and really pay sufficient attention to the details in each country. So it's really a generalization, and as such, it has already, you know, flaws. And the second footnote is that really this is just the highlight, because of course there are different issues that one can discuss. What was the problem before, and you know, both NATO and Armenucci already mentioned a number of things that would have been on the list if I would have had to mention everything, but because we don't have much time, I kind of decided to just highlight those that struck me personally, and those which I kind of see come as a leitmotif, as an explanation of some of the challenges that we see over and over in many countries in our region, if I may say so, because I'm half Bulgarian, half Serbian. So this makes me probably almost Georgian or Armenian, I don't really know, but somehow to the east of Vienna, let's say it like that. And so if I may say, our region means everything to the east of Vienna up to probably somewhere Central Asia. So it's very confusing. But in any case, all these countries always declare ambitions to change things, to improve things. There are a lot of players involved in what happens in education, both private and public and international. And so, you know, over these places, you know, some of these topics are really important. And what I wanted to share is, despite all the discussion and all these commitments, decade-long commitments to improvement, we still really have situations in which, A, the schooling system is predominantly public. This is one. And second, despite the promise that the public system will deliver to the needs of every student, we still see enormous variance in the quality of what is delivered. Sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's just a perception that quality is different, but we have really inequality of opportunities when it comes not so much to access to education. Anybody can access school, but access to good education. And so what happens is that you really see that in all of our countries, you have this process of compensating these gaps through different private means. One is by having resources, like parents invest, parents help, parents find a way to ensure that their children go to the school that they think they should go, whether justified or not, it doesn't matter. The second is that if you don't have resources, you might have social capitals. You might not be particularly rich, but you might have the right connections and so on. So you have this kind of a private involvement of a very specific kind. And then, of course, you also have this element, which was always a challenge, but was not discussed so much. It is the question of the family background and what is the degree of parental involvement. And the selection of these topics, I selected them because we see also these topics play an enormous role during the pandemic. And so usually better off parents would probably be more receptive or be able to create a more conducive environments for learning after school. This could also include the provision of private tutoring and whatnot. Whereas those who are disadvantaged, they're not only disadvantaged of resources and social capital, they're also disadvantaged in terms of circumstances, in terms of the environment they have out of school, and the question of how well can they actually learn. Because if you don't have a chance to learn well at school, maybe you can compensate for this at home. But in any case, these issues that I mentioned, these gaps in quality, can be traced back to certain good old evergreens, if you wish, that have to do with teaching quality very often. And, you know, Armenucci already mentioned this. We never stop to talk about teacher training, and I think we will never stop about talking about teacher training, because this will all remain an important and a challenging area. And so essentially, if I have to summarize what I'm trying to say, the variance in quality, although according to the commitments of the public authorities, this should not be there. The compensation for these gaps in quality through private means, both by resources, social capital, and the question of how well can students actually learn once they're out of school. These were issues that were there before very strongly, and I think they will discuss this in the next round of questions probably, that they have been reinforced massively. I mean, they haven't been reinforced, we just saw them even more obviously during the pandemic, and so plenty of policy challenges attached to these issues. And so this is like, if you ask me, what was the biggest problem? It was indeed this. Why do we need to have this kind of a massive involvement outside of the school so that students get the education that they deserve in the first place? And so this is like, I have to put it in one sentence, that would be that sentence. Yeah. Sorry, probably it's a very confusing statement, but
totally.
save my face and explain what I meant.
Yeah, and I do really appreciate the fact that you decided to connect because there are lots of issues and problems as you already mentioned, but you decided to particularly choose the ones that were still playing a major role during, the categories that still were playing major roles during the pandemic, actually directly influencing. And for example, you brought an example of socioeconomic status, probably of the family of students. Yeah, that was insightful. And we'll continue with this during our question number 2. But before this, Martin will also have a chance to share his experience and his concerns on the issue. What were the issues before COVID in the region, according to you, Martin? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the remarks of all the speakers so far. I will try to make a bit like to sketch the situation how it is in Germany. Even if I have not been in Germany the last 3 years, so most of the COVID time I actually spent in Georgia, not in Germany. But that will affect like the next question, that I'm not an expert how it exactly happened. I was not, and I don't have the insight from the school system in Germany. But like about the general system, I would try to make a couple of comments. I think luckily Germany is a pretty rich country, so there is enough for infrastructure, maintenance of the school buildings. There's possibilities to buy material, school material. The teacher have opportunities to have like further development trainings. So that is not the big issue, I would say, in Germany. Regarding the curriculum, as Nato mentioned before, like in Germany, like civic education or like citizenship education at school is very low, I would say. It's like, I checked it before, like in Bavaria, it's 3 hours, like 1 hour in 9th grade and 2 hours in 10th grade. So it's only 3 hours, like academic hours throughout the whole entire school career, let's say. So it's pretty low. And regarding the situation, I was already saying like Bavaria. Why Bavaria? Because like as Michalo already mentioned, like also in Germany, the school system, educational system is mainly public, and it has this specific that it has actually 16 different systems. Like each federal state has their own educational system, which makes it difficult to talk for Germany in general. But I will try to make the point for Bavaria because it's one of the, it has its specifics, let's say. So I would now share just the screen for you to have a short overview how the educational system in Bavaria looks like. So here you see the screen? Yes, I hope so. Okay.
Yes, it's there.
So it's a 3-parted system. So we have a primary school for everybody. Everybody goes to primary school the first 4 years at school. Approximately you are 9 years old once you finish primary school. 9, perhaps 10, usually 9. And then Bavaria has like a 3-parted educational system. So there's like 3 types of secondary schools. One is called Hauptschule or now Mittelschule. You continue at school for 5 more years. It's kind of the lower academic performance school. Then you have like a middle academic performance school. That's the Realschule or the economic school. So that's for 6 more years altogether. So we have here 5 years, 6 years. And then we have the kind of higher academic performance. It's the grammar school or gymnasium, how it's often called. And it's usually for 8, or now they had a reform like for 9 years, continuing school. Only this one gives you the access to university. So that's important to have in mind. All those ones are rather for vocational training system and apprenticeship designed, which is very strong in Germany. And you have the opportunities to continue to make like your Matura, A-level degree, Abitur to continue to the university. But it's of course like much more difficult and much more, takes more effort in general. So what I want you to keep in mind out of this chart is that like the segregation of students to decide which kind of school they want to attend, which then ultimately evolves like which kind of career you can go to, is done when you are 9 years old, straight after primary school. Actually, and that is one part which is missing here, in Bavaria we always refer to a three-parted school system, but there is a fourth pillar actually for all those students with special needs. So people with disabilities and who can't participate in the regular school system, they have like special schools for students with special needs. So they are not integrated in one of those schools, so far to the inclusion of the system. So why is it relevant? And that's what I wanted. Like, okay, first, like those 16, like this system is only in Bavaria, but it's specific because in Bavaria we don't have comprehensive school system parallel to it. Most of the states in Germany, they have a two system, so those three-parted system and a comprehensive school system parallel to it, where all students from one region would go to one school together. But in Bavaria, not yet, and I think it's the only country actually, or the only state in Germany left with this very strict three-parted system, educational system. Why is it an issue, or what is the problem of it? It's the so-called educational funnel. What we can see here, it's called in Germany Bildungstrichter. It's the educational funnel. Similar what Michael before already mentioned is that, for example, we have 100 kids from academic families background and 100 kids from a non-academic background. Academic means here if the parents, or in this case, it was the father, if the father was at university or not, and studied. So what we can see is that out of 100 kids, 88 kids reached the secondary, like the Sekundarstufe 2, like the gymnasium, the A level, the gymnasium school, the higher educational performance. And then out of them, 83, like 94% actually reached the Hochschulzugang, that's the Abitur, Matura, like the certificate that you can go to university. So out of 100 kids, 83 kids actually reach the opportunity, or get the opportunity to go to university and to study. If we look at the kids coming from a non-academic family and family background, we see that only 46% actually get to the gymnasium and to this higher performance school. And out of that, only 23 kids make it actually to the university. So there's a huge selection and a discrepancy, so that the educational background of your parents and of your family determines you where your future actually goes to, kind of. Of course, there are possibilities, as I said before, to make it on a second or third way through the other institution, but it takes much more effort. So that's what is the educational funnel, and many scholars in Germany actually refer to it that social status is reproduced and manifested. Social status, education, and kids from, or the students from social, let's say, weaker classes or milieus don't get a chance to go to university and are like structurally discriminated and excluded.
I see. Yeah. Thank you, Martin. I have learned personally, I have learned a lot actually, new from you as well, particularly that there are different subsystems in the country. I didn't know about that. And that was again insightful that besides socioeconomic status of your parents, also academic status of your parents actually influences directly how much effort you need to put to go further. Thank you all. And now it's time to jump into our second question, which is how did COVID-19 impact the education sector? And particularly, you can focus on any of the dimensions of you can speak from failures perspective, what failures we had or you had in your country or region, what challenges and even what opportunities, because some people also speak about opportunities as well. But I'm particularly interested in how did the states and how did civil society organizations manage to react on the issues during the COVID-19, I mean, educational issues, whether they managed to get mobilized or redirect their activities, how did they function? So yeah, Armenuhi, please, the floor is again yours. And for this, dear speakers, we have 5 minutes, I mean, each of you. So Armenuhi, please.
Thank you. So speaking about the impact of COVID-19, I will mention that the transition to emergency online education found many educational establishments unprepared. Now looking back and analyzing the impact of COVID-19 on education, we can mention negative as well as positive points. And I will start with negative points to conclude and finish my speech with positive ones. The first negative thing I would mention is teachers, parents, and pupils were not familiar with online learning environments and with online teaching methods. According to the impact of COVID-19 on access to online and offline education in the Eastern Partnership countries policy paper, the period from March to May 2020 was mostly lost, especially at the level of primary and secondary education. Most of the teaching took place via WhatsApp and Facebook. And according to the research of World Vision Armenia, the main platforms used for education in Armenia were Viber and Zoom. About 60% of respondents used Viber and about 45% used Zoom. The second issue I would mention is COVID-19 widened the education gap and shaped existing inequalities. So according to UNICEF, rural versus urban realities can be very different, given that especially those living in rural areas are hit by limited internet and cell phone services. And household incomes even before the pandemic impacted school attendance, with rural areas witnessing some of the lowest participation rates compared with capital cities. World Vision Armenia conducted research in March 2020 when total lockdown just started in Armenia. And according to the research in which 3,000 families from 6 regions of Armenia were included, children from about 14% of the respondent families did not attend classes, and 88% of them didn't have the necessary equipment, and about 79% of children didn't have an internet connection. Third issue was the transition to distance teaching. So it has been a major challenge for the teaching staff and students. In most cases, teachers did not have adequate digital skills to support the move to online learning, nor to equip students to adopt new modes of learning. So online lessons were often used by teachers only for shared PowerPoint presentation. Teaching online in most cases has been conducted without any interactive methods. And this is confirmed by responses received to the student surveys, where only 30% of respondents said that their school or university offers interactive tools for learning. And I refer here again on Eastern Partnership countries policy paper. However, the students confirmed that they did not receive any training to help them use the learning technologies. The next
excuse me, you mean school students, right? Not university students.
This research was done including both school and university students. Yes, and I'm speaking about the both.
And yeah, 1 minute just to sum up, please.
Okay, so I will speak about students with disabilities. So, for example, there has been no system in place to teach blind students how to use technology, hence their participation in formal education has been severely impacted, especially since the full transition to online learning. And according to the research done by World Vision Armenia, 29% of children were excluded from online education, had disabilities. In 55% of cases, education wasn't organized according to children's individual education plans. And in 77% of cases, the goals of individual education plans weren't changed according to new situation. And I had two positive impacts here prepare, but if I don't have time, I'll just keep.
Oh wait, yeah. Let's try to conclude with a positive note. Just one of them.
Yeah, so I would mention that soon after the total lockdown in Armenia, many local international organizations, NGOs, individuals were mobilized and self-organized. And funds for many projects were redirected. Civil society organizations responded much quicker, sometimes even than the state. However, State Ministry of Education expressed flexibility and the situation started gradually improve. So civil society organizations and international donors complemented or at times even substituted governmental mitigation measures, for example, by distributing IT equipment, phones and computers to those living in remote areas at schools. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you too. And again, there were so many pieces of food for thoughts, like to digest later and to think over. Thank you. And before just moving on, just wanted to let you know all that Martin provided in the chat box some links to some research. So do not miss the chance to go through the link as well. And I also have some links prepared, and I will just put it in the chat box for everyone connected with the issues, educational issues during COVID-19, gathered from different reliable sources. And now the same question to you, Nato, please. What happened in Georgia? And yeah.
Thank you, Ani. As I already say, Georgian and Armenian situation is quite similar in this regard. I will save up time and use everything what Armenia already mentioned, because it has happened in Georgia and it is still happening. We have the same gaps in education and same problems with accessibility, and also like, on the contrary to the state, civil society was much faster and more busy preparing and adopting projects to these needs in this very special situation of the pandemic. And what we have seen is that well-organized civil society managed to somehow support and fill the gaps of education and support the online teaching process. But meantime, two main researches were carried out in Georgia. One was done by the Education Coalition, and it was assessing the gaps that were that just rose after the pandemic or in the time of pandemic, and these gaps are not overcame yet, and it will remain still because state has not done non-sufficient step. They were talking about, like, everyone is talking about remediatory modules and programs, but for now nothing is introduced and implemented, and it is so crucial. In one research it is stated that in primary education, and there is the huge deficiency of development of literacy skills, and we can't take kids back to the first grade anymore. It is impossible, and we are in this same situation already 2 years, and we had 2 summers without schools when we needed to prepare ourselves to have, even if like pandemic ends and we have to return schools, we need to be prepared to go back to schools or in changed environment, but we are not prepared and we don't have this full access. And most importantly, what this surveys and research data tells us is that and we have to pay attention to the fact that pandemic in Georgia has further widened inequality, especially among vulnerable groups. The pandemic most affected children from low social economic status, from kids from the large families, members of ethnic minorities, and also students with special needs. And it is also stated in UNICEF's annual report that 90,000 kids left behind education, general education. That is absolutely significant number. So at this point, just to add like one thing that is positive, it is that students tried to focus on this very sensitive topic and made their school projects, civic education related projects, to raise awareness in the communities. And they were working and helping neighbors, and it was magnificent how students actually can do that, but we can't.
That was a chance, and they decided not to miss it, right? They managed to take the chance. Yes. That's nice. And so now I just have one technical question. You mentioned about the Education Coalition, right? Yes. Just provide some details, whether there is a link to this coalition, just to learn for us, for educational experts later. Just drop in the chat box, please, if there is Facebook page or whatever connected with this educational coalition. Thank you. And the same question now, Mihailo, to you. What did happen during COVID in education?
Please, can I tell something? Excuse me, after Nado.
We will have... okay, very quickly, but we will have later at the end. But
I am only one teacher here, and I teach history and civic education. I am Microsoft expert teacher, and I am EENCE member. And with my students, I am founder of many projects. For example, last year was climate changes in our countries. It becomes our project became quality level. Not everything is bad in Georgia. We the teacher try. I was also in new school model trainer for teacher for technology. And many our experts try to teach better our digital generation. Say we don't know what happens after 5 years and 10 years, but we know that they need digital skills, improve online working skills and team working skills. And in EENCE or in many projects, with my students, I am a member of Japan project. Japanese teacher is moderator, global classroom. And I like very much this online teaching because we improve our skills, and it's not...
thank you.
Thank you all of you for your time, and good luck.
I appreciate that you decided to share the experience. Thank you for that, Eka. And later at the end, when we have this question and answer session, you and others will have a chance not only to ask questions, but also share your experience if you have or if you want. Thank you. Now, please, Mihailo, the turn and the floor is yours.
Thanks. Actually, I wanted to build on what our colleague from Georgia just said, the teacher colleague, that in fact, but we did different types of research during COVID. And when it all started, we realized that, in addition to surveys and all the expert opinions that were out there, because everybody all of a sudden knew what needs to be done. Like 2 weeks after the pandemic, all kinds of advice started to pour onto countries from experts, international organizations and stuff. And we were a bit concerned by that because we really didn't hear the voice of the people who were in fact in the schools and the parents and the students, and how are they actually, what do they think is needed right now? And so we initiated this kind of research where ultimately after a year and something, we looked into social media reactions because we thought this is the place where people talk what they want to talk, not answers to questions we might have come up with, but something else. And
excuse me, who are we? It was you and your team.
It's a center. It's the Center for Applied Policy and Integrity. And when I say we have this kind of we're moving target depending on what the project is about. We have maybe one group of experts. Then for another project, we might have experts with another profile. But in this case, I refer to the Center for Applied Policy and Integrity. And in fact, Armenia was one of the countries we covered. So I'm just trying to, because I'll say a few things, and I just want to give you an idea of where the hell this comes from. So who are you? Like, how do you know? And so essentially, we covered something like, I kind of wrote it down, 45 social media groups. We had 10 countries, and the target population we captured was around 3.9 million. And of course, these people talk about all kinds of things: diapers, shopping carrots, black cats, horses, and sometimes they talk about education. And so we have something like 44,000 approximately posts and comments that deal with what is going on in this kind of first year of the pandemic. And so it's interesting to see, like what also colleague from Georgia said, that in fact, yes, civil society organizations, international partners, even private actors were very quick to enter, much quicker than the authorities sometimes, and provide this kind of initial type of support where, it was about ICT equipment, broadband access and stuff like that. But you see, at the end of the day, after the tools are there and everybody has prepared the stage, it still comes down to, to the professionals in education, to the students, to their parents, and to those who are in charge of the schools to do their job. And once this initial euphoria of, okay, here is the platform, here is the tool and all that passed, we were down back to the same issues that were there before. So if a teacher was boring before the pandemic, he was even more boring during the pandemic. If a student had problems to follow because of whatever, family background or a lack of access to resources and whatnot, they have even bigger problems, And so essentially, these kind of problems that were there before, and this is the leitmotif that we started with, at least my statement, the quality of teachers, the limited parental involvement and support, so the environment in which students have to cope with education outside of school, and the inequality of opportunities, and yes, also integrity and corruption. These things came at the forefront because they were always there. They just become worse during the pandemic. And in terms of what we really found beyond that ultimately it's up to those who are in school to take care of things, because nobody can help you at some point. We really saw that the reactions and actions of authorities, they were there. And in some cases, these actions and reactions were, in fact, worse than the actual pandemic. So I'm not saying that they did bad things. We were all learning what we're doing, but I'll just give you, I promise not to share anything, but I just have to share this with you. I don't know whether you can see my screen right now. And so we try to visualize some of these findings. And the first thing is that, in fact, the policy measures that authorities took in these countries we covered, and Armenia was one of them, there was Kazakhstan, we covered certain regions of Russia, Serbia, and also EU countries as well, Italy, Estonia, Bulgaria, is that this big chunk of measures around prevention was something that really turned out. This is like a graph from Italy. So this prevention of spread, all this kind of a very confusing instructions about what needs to be done, who buys the masks, do we keep the windows open all the time or some of the time? There were cases where the windows were open for so long that people actually got sick because it was just cold. It was nothing to do with COVID. So this kind of a prevention of spread thing, which is a measure that is not very usual in education, was something that created a lot of challenges. And the biggest area of problems created by the measures, not so much about the pandemic, was everything that had to do with the organization of inclusive education provision. So you see, although students wanted to go to the classroom, they were not really sure how, because of course, in most cases, people want to not only do their job, but to do their job in the way they're supposed to. And if there is a bunch of new regulations that were never been tested before, this creates really an ample degree of uncertainty and confusion. The other thing is that in the face of this sort of a combined challenge of pandemic and policy responses to the pandemic, you really had this kind of a two patterns emerge. And it's really fascinating. I don't know why. I think it's partially cultural, but partially, again, it's a reflection of problems that were already in the system. You had countries where, like Serbia, for example, teachers always had an issue with working too much. I mean, no disrespect, but this was known that they have strong trade unions. You can't touch them for any big reforms. And essentially, every minister in power tried to be very friendly to the teaching collective because they were really a political power to be reckoned with. So once the pandemic hit, many teachers said, we can't teach like that. Call us when it's over. And so this was like one typical reaction. In other places, like of all places, Belarus, we realized that people actually use this pandemic in order to unite. And they started, Estonia as well was another example, they started to help each other. So it created a much stronger sense of community and mobilization. And so in these countries, changes were much easier because everybody felt somehow responsible or challenged. And people started to offer each other different kinds of support. And here you have a typical scenario. This is from Ukraine, where in fact, when things didn't work out well, everybody was blaming the authorities for that. And of course, the authorities were blaming someone else. So you had very interesting patterns of interaction here, which are really very indicative for contexts beyond the pandemic. So if you have a context in which you want to implement new radical reforms in these places, say inclusive education and whatnot, you already know what kind of reactions you have, because we learned a lot about that during the pandemic. And the last point, if I have 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, it is that the pandemic and the confusion that was created by that opened the door for the entrance of private actors, which were not there before. So of course, this means, of course, financial support, but it also means different types of totally new policy support by actors who before that were not active in policy support at all, and also a completely different type of advice and reactions by the international community. And so I think that after the pandemic is over, and this is, I think, the third group of questions that you probably discuss, we will have a much more diverse, complex, and confusing landscape of cooperation and influence in education. And what we think we knew people want and do is not going to be the same. And this goes well beyond the question, do they have computer access or not? I'll stop here.
Thank you. One just question again, technical. Is the research already done, and is there a link available to share with us? Because I believe that most of us will be really happy to get access to this research and to read a lot and to read on this later in detail.
We have, I mean, I can share with you in the chat the countries that are covered. So two statements maybe quickly. One is the findings, the way I'm presenting them, they will be out at the end of the year. We have presentations that were offered in bits and pieces at different conferences. We have a description of the methodology, which I can share. It's supposed to be published 3 weeks ago. It's still not, but it will be out there. And the databases that we have from all countries, they're public. So if you're interested in digging into the social media data for your country, give me a sign and I'll send you this data so you can have fun.
Perfect. Thank you. Martin, and the turn is yours. 5 minutes for this. Thank you.
Yeah, I will try to. Thank you very much for all those interesting remarks already. As I said, like I spent most of the time of the pandemic time in Georgia. So about the German school system, I just got it like kind of indirectly. I knew about it from news, from family members, from colleagues and so on. But I was not in Germany and did not have the school inside exactly. Yeah? But what happened, I think Michael already said it before, like remember what was like the situation back then in March. It was like, oh, pandemia, and nobody knows what to do, first of all. So what happened in Bavaria was we prolonged the holidays. So that was the first step. Like we need more time to figure out what happened. And then was okay, like we have gotten a digital online learning platform. So we will start with that. And what happened actually is, of course, like if like they prolonged their holidays, I think for 1 or 2 weeks. And then afterwards, like the students were all happy, the teachers were happy. And then afterwards it started online. And that what happened was, if you have like an online tool for online teaching already developed, is good. But if then there are like hundreds of thousands of people on Monday morning logging in and trying to access, their whole system broke down completely. So that's also a thing which was difficult, and I think it's perhaps a German mentality thing. Also, it's about like data protection. It's the centralized system. We can't use WhatsApp. We can't use Facebook. We can't use Zoom because the data protection is not there or is not guaranteed. In Georgia, instead, in this time, I have seen many motivated teachers who tried to reach their students, which all means possible, what they had, like they were calling them, which would not be thinkable in Germany, actually. And so I think this shows a bit how difficult it was, like that there are so many different things and how complex the situation was to actually to reach out, and then in a centralized system with all those, rather like to avoid too much not sure if I stick with all the regulation and so on. It made it very difficult for the teachers to reach the students in this time. Then what happened afterwards was that the system in Germany, we said already, it's on a state system. And then Bavaria said, okay, we go down to each district. So depending on the corona situation in each district, the schools are opening or are remote working. Which had then the effect that, for example, I got it from my sister. My sister is working in one district, is living in a second district, and the daughter goes to school in a third district, which makes it very, very difficult in terms like to think about working and having the kids at home for homeschooling at the same time. So that was one main thing as well, which made it complicated and stressful for the kids, because this update came like every week. So they did not know, do I have to go to school next week or not? Is it going to be online or not? So it was very, very difficult. By now, the schools are back on residential schooling at the school with hygienic measures in place, with masks and so on. Another thing was what I wanted, like also to say before, like this the school system that since it's like a public school system and a very highly centralized school system, it's a lot about political will and political sometimes ideologies regarding the school system, but also political understanding in it. And so, for example, the regulations in Germany were mainly affecting a lot the educational system, but not as much work, for example. So people had to go to work still, and parents. And it was difficult how to organize homeschooling when the kids are, when you have to work by yourself and go to work. And there I will come now to a different point, which was already like mentioned before. The kind of the access and the inclusion of education became much more difficult for let's say, socially, economically weaker milieus, because they usually are not the one who have the money to buy straight away 2-3 computers for the kids to work on, or tablets. They don't have the money for a private tuition. It's sometimes also depending on the work, like what we had before with the academic and the background of families. Academia, people working in academia, they were much easier to work actually remotely at home. And so to be at home with their kids and to support them in the educational process, even if they have to work. I know for many it was also difficult to work at home and to have the kids at home. But for many it was even more difficult to go to work in the supermarket because you had to work there and the kids were at home alone and trying to deal with the online learning. So those injustice and imbalances and this like the difficulties and kind of discriminating of access and inclusion and those challenges, they got worsened. So it's the gap is widened. I have not found a study actually on that, so that's why I would be very interested in the study you have done, Michaelo, about the impact. But what like the Teacher Association, the cultural, the Ministry of Education, all say that there's a huge learning gap and that the equality and the chances of equality got worsened. Like the system got is dividing even more. How to overcome was the idea now, like I said before, that they prolonged the holidays. Now this year they were thinking about canceling the holidays in order to put like more school efforts in to overcome those learning gaps. Or I think then actually it did not happen. The 1 week in spring was cancelled actually, but the summer holidays are as planned as usually. And there was the idea of giving students the chance, or there is the idea of giving students the chance to repeat voluntarily. But by now, since that would be now happening in September, I do not know how many students actually make use of that. I would, out of my experience, I would say rather not, since then would mean you have to repeat 1 year and you have come to a new class. And I think that many of the students would not like to do that. So that's probably not the solution to overcome those learning deficits during this year, which are once again unequally distributed.
Yeah, the resources, time. Actually, there was so much pressure and burden. There was so much pressure on the community, on parents, students, teachers as well. And here, like we experts and we civil society representatives, we sit here, talk from different perspectives, but as you and Michaelo mentioned, that it's truly upon the shoulders of these people who are trying to move forward like the agenda and the work, and it's really tough. But now it's time to understand what the future of education is going to be. Many already experts and organizations have tried to make some predictions, of course, in a long-term perspective, for example, stating that millions of children are not going to return to school. There is going to be less investment in education, and that lost learning will deepen inequality, and that digital education is not a solution and equalizer. It's not an equalizer. It's not going to solve the problem. But what is your perspective? What the future of education will be in the future? You can reflect either in a short-term perspective or a long-term perspective. But for this, we have very limited time, 2 minutes each of you, please. The most important things that you would like to share with the audience, because we run time and we don't have really much time left, and we need to have some time for the audience as well. Please, Armenuhi, your turn. What do you think as an expert in the field?
Thank you, Ani. I think the current crisis has highlighted the need for strategic approaches to capacity building focused on digitalization, enhancement of teaching capacities in online environments, and inclusion and equity in online learning and teaching. So opportunities arise to overcome historical skepticism toward online distance learning. And speaking about Armenia, I would mention the project eSchool, which was established in March 2020 with National Center for Educational Technologies, with UNICEF Armenia. And within the framework of this project, in accordance with the general education program, video lessons, webinars were prepared and materials were posted on the online platform. And now, in rural areas of Armenia, where the school is lacking subject teachers, e-school lessons and materials are used. As we see, the shift to emergency distance education has been challenging, but it also provided an opportunity for more strategically reconsidering online education. Another opportunity that COVID-19 has brought about the reconsideration of the role played by teachers continuing professional development, improvement of digital skills. And within the project implemented by Teach for Armenia, with UNICEF Armenia and directed by Ministry of Education, following actions were taken: online working capacities of teachers were strengthened, self-guided modules, including one on the usage of IT tools in the context of inclusive education, were developed, and the system of trainings with follow-up component, continues gradually decreasing mentoring support to teachers was implemented. So in the future, mentors prepared within the project will go to different regions of Armenia and provide support to teachers. So concluding, I would mention that the recognition of the need to build individual and organizational capacity with regard to digital skills and modern pedagogies would have certainly taken longer without the momentum created by pandemic. In the future, we will have more digitalized education, with teachers having better skills in online distance teaching and students with better skills in online learning, hopefully.
Thank you for your thoughts and insights and perspectives. And if you have any kind of data or resources that are available connected with the things that you already mentioned, connected with these modules or whatever it is there, please again share in the chat box for our audience. Now, you please, just 2 minutes on your perspectives. What do you think? What we're going to have in the future?
Okay, now I will try to be as fast as possible. As the education system has suffered greatly during the pandemic, it is worth mentioning that everyone gained these digital skills, acquired digital literacy. So it is like very important. And I also believe that increasing digital literacy is important for educating global citizens, and even to prepare them for the students for the future employment market. So if we make sure, the state makes sure that education, digital education is accessible for everyone, then I see it as a good sign. But also, like, on the other hand, there is the socialization process when kids need to have it more in contact. So here I see the more need of civic education and civic engagement and activism. So yeah, to sum up, there is still some hope that we will have like better education and accessible education in the upcoming years. Thank you, Ani.
Fingers crossed. Thank you, Nato. Mikhailo, what do you think?
I think that there will be some topics that will are already maybe a bit more important than they were before, perhaps. One of these topics, I certainly hope they will become more important than they were before. One of these topics, I think, is the well-being of students and the role this plays in their learning outcomes and everything we do, because even in the best of settings, if your target is not feeling happy, you won't achieve much. And so we have this kind of a whole question of well-being of students, which also puts focus on a category of professionals in education, which I think has been neglected for a very long time, also because their role has been defined 20, 30 years ago in different times. And this is the role of the school psychologist. School psychologists have a very specific role, but essentially now, if you look at how many people potentially need support, and we're not talking only about children who are the target of inclusive education, we're talking about pretty much potentially everybody, we realize that these people also, their role and their professional development, their status in the system is not what it should be. So well-being of students is one large area. Another is that, in fact, the 2 years, pandemic takes 2 years, right? And so in these 2 years, there were different kinds of changes and disruptions. And if you think from the point of view of students, they start getting their grades in most schooling systems around grade 4 or 5, and they're in the school for around 12 years. So this means that the pandemic accounts for about a third of their time in school. So we're talking about a very specific generation of students that I think will need a very special package of remedies or support after the pandemic, also in order to restore trust in the schooling system, because in many cases, I think where there was distrust, for example, in the grades students receive and so on, having this happen in a hybrid or totally digital environment didn't really help. It's nothing easier than to actually give grades remotely. It's actually even easier to cheat. So talking about integrity and corruption, I think that this is an area that probably will become slightly more important, just in order to make sure that this generation of students that has been receiving their grades, and some of them, this was a high stake year, like graduation from the school, decisions about where they want to go after school and all that. There, I would think probably an extra effort in order to restore trust and make sure and guarantee that what these people have in terms of credentials is just as valid as the credentials of people before and after the pandemic. And there is one more point that the last one that I want to raise is the question of, how to call this, participatory governance, because in most cases, the countries introduced measures that deactivated or bypassed rules and mechanisms that were put in place after many, many years of fighting from the side of civil society. They were there in order to ensure public accountability and control, especially around procurement, around decisions, high-stake decisions in education. In many cases, now there's a mechanism to bypass these things because, we need this in emergency, we need quick decisions and all that. We don't have time to do this kind of democratic stuff. And so in many cases, these rules have been introduced, these bypass mechanisms are there, but they are not being scaled back. And so once the pandemic is over, I bet you in many countries, this will remain a problem, that these channels of bypassing public accountability control mechanisms are still going to be in place. Authorities are going to forget conveniently to reverse things to the way they used to be. And so this is another area that definitely we should consider. And this comes on top of everything else you can read on the OECD and World Bank pages about, education should be responsive yet rigid, and teachers should be better, and we should have digitalization in a better way and all that. All this stands, but there are a number of topics which are slightly less visible, perhaps, but I think equally important in this case: well-being, integrity, and helping these students who otherwise might become kind of a lost generation of graduates.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Not very much positive, but lots of ways to think over and to reconsider and probably...
My job, if everything's fine, what will we do? I have to find problems.
Yeah, thank you. And Martin, you please. Hopefully some good news from you there.
Hopefully no lost generation. I only can hope for that. I wanted to add on the comments of NATO. I think was digitalization. I think that will come, in which terms, however. In Germany, I think there's this huge discussion of we need fast internet. It's we are very slow in digital competences, skills, infrastructure, and all those things. So the expectations are very high. I think, and there I agree with NATO, many people, many teachers, students, parents, all over the entire society learned a lot on personal skills and methods and tools, how to use them. So I think that was a huge boost in one regard. But on the other hand, and that's where my youth work background comes in. I think that school is much more than only learning and transmitting knowledge. And those social learning, those also learning which needs social contact, which needs movement, which needs interaction, and with your world, not only digital and on the internet or on the web. I think this one is, I'm not sure if, I think sometimes now in this hype in Germany, everybody wants to have more digitalization. I sometimes think that it's not really thought through in which regards digitalization would actually help the learning process. I think there are a couple of studies which say, okay, it's actually not helping that much. It's all the PowerPoint and the Navigator, all those digital tools are not helping us to develop our brain for students. So that's what I'm a bit afraid of. But I think the digitalization, this will be more in the methodology of the teachers used and so on.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for today's your insights and concerns and experience as well. The time is over, but because we started a little bit late, we still have some 10 minutes. And I have a couple of some extra questions that I would like our speakers to cover this. So the first question goes to Armenuhi. Armenuhi, could you very shortly, though, share with us the experience of Armenia, because it was not only COVID, the pressure of COVID in Armenia on the education sector, but because there was the war, 44-day war, and that actually affected the education sector and the kids from Artsakh. What about their rights, and what about their how the state, Artsakh and Armenia, how did they manage to actually improve the situation, or whether did they manage actually how this question of this kid how was this solved?
Thank you, Ani, for this question. So comparing with COVID-19, the Artsakh war was the greater challenge for us. And the conflict has led to a significant amount of displacement. And Armenia has hosted a large amount of displaced ethnic Armenians from Artsakh, mostly women and children. As a result of the conflict, about 34,000 displaced people were living in Armenia. About 27% of children were school age. And in the case of children, along with vital needs like food security and etc., another priority needed to be included in the education system, and receiving the quality education was also added. The issues of children, educational needs and rights had been raised in the press, in public discussions, and in the activities of NGOs, civil society organizations, and local international organizations. And in the case of COVID-19, individuals and above mentioned, as in the case of COVID-19, here as well, the individuals and above mentioned organizations were mobilized and self-organized. So children were accepted to schools of their temporary living communities, and UNICEF cooperated with numbers of non-governmental organizations that provided individual, group, and psychological support to children, involving psychologists, social workers, as well as teachers in the affected communities. That primary task was to resume education. So besides displaced children got computers, necessary equipment, materials for participating in education. And in early November, 1 month online course for social workers, teachers, and educational psychologists launched to improve their skills to support children temporarily arriving in Armenia. And about 900 teachers of Armenian secondary schools have deepened their experience of working with children of different age groups who had psychological trauma. And I would mention two of many lessons learned. The first lesson is schools should establish and strengthen their academic and psychological support system for the students who struggle to adjust to new circumstances. And it can be the war or any other emergency situation. And the second thing I would mention is education policy issues in organizing education for displaced children, such as inadequate assessment of children's educational needs, limited autonomy of educational institutions, a lack of flexibility in terms of educational content have to be taken into account.
Thank you. Thank you. And the next question comes to Mihailo. Mihailo, as an expert of integrity, particularly integrity in education, what would you say on this? How did COVID impact the integrity of education?
Actually, I think I smuggled in part of the response in my previous statement, I realized. So the good thing is that now I don't really have too much to say, but in general, I definitely think that the issue of of involvement of private actors, and the fact that we've seen to what extent public schooling systems still depend on external support, despite all the resources and efforts. In some countries, like Ukraine, for example, I mean, the country invests almost 9% of its GDP in education. So despite all the efforts, we've seen to what extent, especially in the extreme circumstances, public schooling is actually dependent on external support. And we also know from the work before on integrity, also in Armenia, that where you have this kind of external involvement, especially from parents and from actors who are not meant to be involved in this way, these areas are very often unregulated or not regulated properly, and you reinforce the dependency of public providers on this kind of external support, which of course puts them in a difficult position to to provide favors in return, or to have biased decision when it comes to important areas of operation like school admissions, giving of grades, and so on and so on. So this dependency didn't become smaller, it's actually bigger. And so in terms of corruption prevention and integrity, I think that this is going to be something to take a look into, because because this dependency is higher than before, you'll have also much more channels of influence, and much more the situation of decision makers like school principals, but also teachers, will become even more difficult, because they'll know they depend actually on support, external support, that doesn't come from the state or the local authorities. They depend on external support even more than before. And so it will become more difficult to do their job in a neutral way that is fair to all their students, independently of whether these students, independently of the kind of background the students come from.
Yeah, thank you. And another question comes actually to Nato and Martin. So we know that many countries, not only in Eastern Partnership countries and Russia, but also in Western Europe and even all over the world, are today facing societal polarization. And many observers even talk about the so-called new cultural war between conservatives and liberals. And the question comes in the following way. Well, how can the educational system contribute to avoid this polarization and radicalization?
When I was thinking, when I heard it, thinking that since I was talking about this segregation in Germany and the 3 school models, that does not foster any social and societal discourse and dialogue, because you're separating also on milieus pretty early. But then I was thinking, actually, for example, in the United States, as far as I know, they have mainly those high school models where all students from one district go to one school, and you still have a very high polarization of society. So I'm not sure if the connection or the correlation is actually direct or fitting with the school with segregation or not. But perhaps also taking the topic of digitalization into account, I have the impression that polarization and sensationalism and news in the internet are often, I think, very shorter. You don't have that much of background information, or you don't get it provided. You have to put more effort in by yourself, let's say it like that. But the information you get is often probably shorter and more sensational. And so in this regard, I think we have to the school system has, or the educational system have to put more effort on those critical thinking, media literacy skills to put in. Not only to know how to use Zoom and Microsoft Teams and the tools, but also to use it in a good way, let's say. I think that is something which will come, or which would be needed more to overcome this polarization and this.
Yeah, agree, totally agree. And Nato, would you like to cover this topic as well? Just a few words or addition to what Martin said?
Just 2 words. It is also important. We talk a lot about civic education, but civic education is a subject at schools. It is not cross-cutting topic in all subjects. Media literacy is not like mandatory to be like acquired by, for example, language teachers and math teachers and physics teachers, but it is important that like media literacy and civic education and human rights to be mainstreamed in the schools. So that is our only way to avoid depolarization and then radicalization. So.
I see. So if we try to sum up, big thank yous for everyone, to each of our speakers today, for your readiness, support, time, and patience to join us today, actually. COVID-19 is still here, unfortunately, and this is what we're going to face during this upcoming months. And unfortunately, it's a fact, and some of the countries are already facing new wave of COVID-19. But the fact is that it was really high time to gather together and to share some experiences that we have already had, and to share our also even learned lessons and even insights. So thank you, everyone, for your insights and concerns and shared concerns and experiences and thoughts. And we'll be in touch, and hopefully we'll have another chance to meet, and hopefully one day, and hopefully very soon in person, we'll have a chance to meet and talk on these issues, and in the past already, not probably, not in the present tense, hopefully, fingers crossed. But yeah, this is what we had today. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, our audience also, and your time. Stay tuned and stay with us and follow other EENCE discussion series. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues, dear panelists, and dear audience. The major challenge that we face in all EENCE Club is the time is not enough for us. Now I see that we are talking more than 1 hour 45 minutes, but still it's not enough, especially when we are covering the topic about education, access to education, which is key priority in all sustainable development goals. So education is still there in every SDG. And when we are talking in such a wider perspective of education, system of education, it's really hard. So I will not, again, take your time and make my insights or share my ideas or thoughts, but I can't but thank to all panelists, all speakers for an insightful, for interesting and useful panel discussion. Thanks for the useful links that you have provided. Personally, me will certainly go through the links, at least some of them that you have provided. It's valuable for us and the audience, I guess. Today we had a very diverse panel discussion because more than 4 country representatives were there, and they were trying to bring into the center their country perspective as well as the expertise that they are doing as a researchers, as an educational experts, etc. Big thanks to Narine Teknejyan, the moderator of the event, for the well preparation, for the professional work and the responsible approach that she is introducing during all the EENCE clubs that we are organizing. And stay tuned, because the next EENCE club will be again dedicated to education. This time we will speak about the education of adults. Golden age people also matter, and we should and we must to think about their rights, their fundamental rights to the access of education and in the regard of lifelong learning system as well. So let's meet on 18th of September during the next EENCE Club, which will be in Russian this time. And thanks to all for your time. Thanks to the audience for being such an active listeners, observers of today's meeting. Thanks for your questions and see you next time.